First thing you have to do is look at the definition of service and make sure you have an understanding of it. See how it deals with things like products and other aspects. Re-emphasize how important the customer is, probably even more so than it is on a product side, but I never want to make that conclusion. And then bring in other aspects such as recovery and guarantees, and even employee attitudes on service, which is becoming, especially on a global level, it's becoming more and more important. You could see through some charts that the shift to services has been significant as manufacturing jobs reduce. More and more people find themselves working in the service industries. Interestingly enough, there are other parts of the world where the percent of service employment is even greater than the United States. Now, key concepts in looking at the definition of service include the fact that usually it's an intangible as compared to a hard product. Quite often there's an interrelationship between production and consumption on a service level. One very good point in many people's opinion is the fact that most service operations don't involve finished goods inventory, but other concepts such as front office and back office type of considerations are part of it. There's more difficulty in defining what quality means in a service organization, and those definitions are in fact very much different than they are in a product or a manufactured product. One of the things we want to keep in mind are identify things like tangible services, where you can clearly measure and identify what the seller or the product or the service does for you, as opposed to psychological benefits, which are more touchy-feely type of things. And even in a hard product, we make decisions why we buy things without really thinking that whether they're rational or emotional decisions. As an example, buying clothes, is it functional or is it emotional? Even buying a car, is it functional or is it emotional? I would venture to say there's a lot of purchasing decisions like this that we don't even think about that are really more emotional decisions. Physical goods are basically what you can carry away. In a service product, you have very few of those involved. Contact with the customer is probably one of the most important things in the service business. So that interaction between the service provider and the customer becomes very important. You see it in the health industry now. As we get to selling products more over the internet, and especially through, regardless of what type of telecommunication it is, there's more interaction by phone and other media between the provider and the ultimate customer. And that becomes important because quite often the customer's decision is based on their impression of that provider. This has been a problem for some people who've decided to outsource their customer service to countries like India and Pakistan because of the cheaper labor market. And what they've experienced is when you're dealing with some of these people who do speak English, but the culture is different, you have difficulties getting people to respond to your needs. So they're trying to address that. In cases where there's low customer contact, the operation itself can probably concentrate more on more efficiency in its operation, its processes. However, just like any customization issue, the more contact you have with a customer, the more the customer is going to have unique demands, And the result of that is going to be, it's going to be a lot more difficult as an operation to maintain high efficiency levels, and what you're going to need from a cost point of view is people who can diagnose and analyze better. And what you have to do is make your service to the customer more visible and something that they can realistically see and measure. Inefficiency in service is a consideration that organizations have to look at. The key here is, how do you manage the customer? Because quite often most of the things that are decided are demanded by the customer and influenced by the customer. So to what extent do you you have to find ways to have some control and be able to deal with the customer on a level. One example, for instance, in the customer service field is when a customer places an order, has to wait, let's say 2 or 3 weeks for that order, assumes that it's going to be there on time and doesn't hear anything. The key, if something's going wrong, the key is to contact the customer and notify them of any changes before they contact you. If a customer calls you first and says, what is happening, or is it going to be on time, and you say, oh, I meant to call you, there's a change, that translates as poor service. However, if you call the customer before they do that and say, we've just checked on your order, it looks like it's going to be delayed a couple days or something like that, in most cases the customer is going to appreciate the call and going to presume that you've been on top of it, and that's what I call beating the customer to the phone. There are a lot of variability issues involved in the service issue. That is arrival, requests, and mostly capabilities. But what translates to the customer is your attitude, your effort, and your willingness to work with the customer. In that, if what most organizations find is if they show that effort, the customer will probably be more willing to participate with them and handle the changes that take place. If they feel that the service provider is not making any effort to do that, it makes a whole difference in their opinion of service. Customer directness, front office services, very important. Low contact is what's usually called as back office services. These are services that do not have constant interaction with the customer. Those are the ones that can really do a lot of companies in, because that customer is not totally aware of what's happening and usually thinks of the worst things happening. Now, why do you then try to move many activities to the back office? Well, you select the ones that are most important to the customer, most visible to them. Those are the ones that you invest in the most, and you want to put them in front of the customer as much as possible. There's other concepts such as service recovery, service guarantee, that are important to different industries. The recovery side is how you deal with things that go wrong, and what is both your attitude and your ability to deal with it. The guarantee side is a little different than that, because it's really a reflection of how do you stand behind your product. A good example of that now is type of warranties that some auto manufacturers are putting on their cars. There was a time when most manufacturers would warranty their cars for maybe 35,000 miles or something like that. Now you're seeing some manufacturers who are warranting their cars for up to 100,000 miles. So what they're doing is they're making a statement that says, we stand behind our product or our service. Technology is an important thing in services. It's not just related to hard product, but it's related to service issues, mostly in the process and especially in the IT field. But again, it translates to the visible people as far as the customer is concerned. So going back to what we said earlier, as far as front door and back door operations, you try to look to see what is most visible to your customer and make sure that you emphasize that. We've talked about supply chain, we've talked about globalization. The fact that more and more outsourcing and offshoring is taking place, not just in products, but in services. We alluded to the fact that a lot of customer service operations are being outsourced to countries like India and Japan, especially English-speaking countries. But even now that the world is made up of a lot of people with different languages, it's changing even more with services having to provide bilingual operations as well. Some non-value added functions are generally the ones that are pretty much considered for outsourcing. Offshoring is a little different because you're not totally outsourcing the service or the product, you're just moving it from the United States to a single location offshore, usually for cost advantages. There's different types of services where employees are involved, and the most important emphasis here is that employees be made aware of their importance. Actually, their importance is more increased because they are now sometimes the most visible people to the customer compared to the old manufacturing days.